Good evening and welcome to the Legion Cantina. In today's episode, we're going to be reviewing the Special Forces units for the Rebel faction in Star Wars Legion. So here we are, back into the sort of powerful section of the Rebel faction, the Special Forces. They've got a pretty broad variety of options. I think it's 9 or 10 that we're going to look at today. As with the last two episodes, I'm going to be putting them on onto this tier list, and we'll be sort of assigning them a rank from S to D. A reminder that D is sort of pretty much unusable units that almost always make a list worse. C is fairly weak units that sometimes make a list worse, but in some cases might be fairly good. B tier is kind of average units that don't really make a list better or worse. They're kind of just fairly average. A tier is for pretty powerful units that are either sort of consistently fairly good or situationally very powerful. And then S tier is for units that you can almost build an army around and are always going to offer good value for their points. Yeah, so without further ado, let's get into it. And with the recently buffed Clan Wren. So these are the sort of one of the Mandalorian options that Rebels get in the Special Forces slot. For my money, I think these are slightly better than the basic Mando Resistance without the Clan Wren tag. I think you trade a little bit of outright damage with the Mando Resistance for more survivability. So these guys they're pretty tough. Obviously, they got those Mando saves, and they would have 6 health with this full unit, and they've all got obviously Impervious and the Surging Red saves. So you can think of them as kind of, a mini Sabine or a mini Boba Fett or something like that, except arguably a bit tougher with that nimble and with those red surging saves. They normally come in around 100 points. I would normally be adding the prepared supplies to them as well as situational awareness, and then you can take the rockets. And I think there's a bit of a debate now with the whether you take the shields or whether you would take that prepared supplies, because you do have pretty good access to dodges in Rebels, so maybe you don't always need that prepared supplies, but I tend to play them a bit cautiously, so better to have it and not need it, as people say. In terms of how they play, they're more about scoring objectives than they are about outright damage. I think normally you're looking at, if you're shooting at range 2, they're getting 5 black, a red and a white, which probably comes out at about 4.5 hits on average. And you have reasonable access to aims if you want them with Retinue Sabine, although normally you'll be taking a dodge to set up that nimble. But it's part of the reason I sometimes take the prepared supplies on them, so you can almost take that risk with taking the aim with their Retinue Sabine rather than just having to always take that dodge to set up that nimble. But yeah, they're mainly focused on getting to an objective, doing a bit of damage, and now that their pistols also work in melee, which is pretty nice, so you're going to be getting exactly the same damage output in melee as you would be getting if they were shooting their weapons. They can handle themselves in melee fairly well. Like, it used to be a significant downgrade, whereas now, because Ursa and the basic blasters can be used in melee, you may as well. They didn't give Tristan's gun the ability to shoot in melee, I suspect because it does have that lethal one, so it might be quite strong to give it that Pierce one on top of that fairly solid dice pool. But yeah, as I've said, they do have pretty good synergy with Sabine Wren, who I don't think is in the strongest position right now, but I don't think she's a very weak unit. She was right at the top of C tier, and it would only take a few little changes, or even like Ahsoka getting stronger, for instance, to make Sabine feel a lot more viable. But yeah, they're a pretty solid unit. They have a fairly clear role, and I'm going to put them at B tier because I think if you definitely include them with a list with Sabine, they feel pretty strong. Mando Resistance are sort of the other side of things. So in comparison to Clan Wren, the big weakness is they're only 1 HP each, whereas the 2 HP on Clan Wren does mean you're probably going to hold on to that damage significantly longer. However, you are able to equip an additional trooper to the Mando Resistance, so you can go up to 4 in the unit, which is pretty nice for increasing a bit of firepower. So they do come in slightly cheaper than Clan Wren as well, not that much cheaper. Like, they're probably 5 to 10 points cheaper on average if you're taking the duelist. So yeah, they're not bad, and I think while they are in inverted commas a budget alternative, they're not that much worse, and they're not as reliant on Sabine, obviously, for that synergy, but just getting those tokens from Retinue Sabine from Clan Wren is probably enough for me just to push Clan Wren above Mando Resistance. Yeah, I mean, you are in a faction with good dodge access, so maybe I'm kind of overrating that synergy with Sabine, but again, dodges are tricky because you want to have them in advance of taking an action, and with a powerful special forces like this, you may want to be acting quite early on in a turn. especially if this one is more damage focused than the sort of raw survivability of Clan Wren with that sort of with those 2 health each. Another thing is that the rockets, so the jetpack rockets do feel better on Mando Resistance than they do on Clan Wren, because generally you'll be taking 4 in a squad, so getting 4 rockets from that weapon rather than just 3 does feel pretty good. And, you know, 4 rockets with impact 4, surge crit on red dice feels pretty good. You know, you'll be mad if you miss one, but, you know, getting 4 hits on a tank early or something is pretty good. And worst comes to worst, these guys can probably tank a hit from a big shooting unit like, you know, a snail tank or an AAT or an ATST or something. But yeah, they don't want to be stood out in the open very often. Yeah, a solid unit. I think slightly worse than Clan Wren, but functionally play fairly similarly and have sort of similar benefits and downsides, just a bit less survivability. One of my personal favourite units in the Special Forces slot, and maybe actually in the whole of Rebels, is the humble Ewok Slinger. Almost a strict upgrade on the Ewok Skirmisher, apart from the fact they're in the Special Forces slot, which inherently gives them a tougher time getting into lists, and perhaps explains why their power level is maybe slightly lower than ideally like to make it. But 35 points, you're getting pretty good value. Like, it's 6 bodies, and that independent surge 1 goes a really long way. Just occasionally, you know, you're not going to be rolling that many surges on your white defense die. So when you are able to, you know, keep your Ewok Slinger unit alive on 1 HP because you made that, you had that 1 surge token, it does feel pretty good. And with their low profile and things like that, like, they're not a very desirable target to be shot at, and they can hang around. They can hang around. Don't expect them to, you know, tank loads of fire, and especially if, you know, they can get past that cover with quite a few dice rolls, they are going to crumble very quickly. But they're pretty fun, and, you know, for a very cheap activation that can, you know, occasionally high roll on their shooting, it's not bad at all. I think not being strictly melee is such a big deal for this unit, because throwing 6 surging black, effectively, if you want to think of them as surging black, but at range 2, you know, especially if you're taking the mega slingers, which aren't very, you know, competitively strong, but are really fun. You know, it's not uncommon to, you know, hit 7 or 6 or 7 with the slingers, and that's not you know, that's not nothing. Especially from not 35, but that'd be 58-point unit. But yeah, I think using your special forces as a unit to sit at the back and cap objectives just doesn't feel great. I think you can use your core for that. So unless there is a movement with the way you sort of do list building with Rebels, I think these guys will always struggle to find a bit of a home, just because you kind of need, with the way Rebels are now, you kind of need your special forces to be making plays and really doing damage to your opponent. So while they are an excellent value unit, and I think are arguably one of the sort of best per points units out there, in terms of what you're getting and what they can offer, I just don't think they're quite what the Special Forces slot needs right now. But saying that, I'm giving them an A tier for theme, just because I think all the Ewok stuff is actually pretty well done thematically, and a power level of a B, maybe, I was about to say slightly harsh, but I think it's actually quite fair. Like, if you put these guys in your army, they're cheap, they're almost an activation filler, and yeah, they're not going to hurt your list by being included, but there are just more powerful options in the Rebel faction. Commandos, they're in a weird spot. They're sort of a mid-range shooting unit, and their heavy weapons are a bit all over the place right now. They have a sort of proton charge sapper, which only works at range 1, does give blast and some nice keywords, but not really what the unit wants to be doing. The other option is you take the sniper, and that's also not really what the unit wants to be doing, because that sniper at 38 points, you basically want to wrap it in cotton wool. And the Rebel Commandos, while they do have low profile, it's not enough to keep a rebel, you know, a rebel infantry unit alive. And yeah, they end up being a bit like vets in that sense, where they don't really have a clear role. I think the strike team obviously does, and we'll come on to that one in a second. I think, yeah, having snipers isn't bad, and a sniper with Scout 2 and Sharpshooter feels pretty good. And especially that high velocity, you know, countering any dodge shenanigans that people might have. But with a black and a white, like, you're averaging 1 hit, and it's not uncommon to, you know, just completely blank. So you kind of feel like you need to aim. But spending a whole turn to do, you know, 1 PS1 normally just isn't really enough. So Yeah, they're in a bit of an odd spot, and I kind of hope they get a bit more of an identity going forward. They feel a bit like, I don't know, Jin or something, where it's not entirely clear what you use this unit for, and you could use it as just, a kind of upgraded version of a core unit, and for that, I think this is almost a definite, this is a massive upgrade over Rebel Veterans if you compare the two, but that's not what you, again, similar to the Ewok Slingers, it's not really what you want your special forces to be doing. So not a terrible unit, but just, again, not one that you're looking to build a list around. And I think their theme is kind of meh, like they don't feel super like special forces-y and very sneaky. So yeah, and the power level of a C, I think by choosing to put these in over other special forces, I think in some cases you are, well, almost always you are making your list less strong. So not a terrible unit, but just not a great unit. The Commando Strike team, again, I think they kind of work in tandem with the Commandos in terms of their identity. These, I would say, they're kind of long-range skirmishers. I don't think you'd ever want to be engaging in any kind of mid-range firefight with these guys. I think they sit at the back, they'll tag an objective, and they'll snipe. So at least they have a clearer role in that sense. But you have to include Commandos to include these, and that means even if you don't take the sniper on the Commandos, you're still playing probably upwards of 100 points for 6 surging white health with the low profile. Yeah, it's not really what you want to be doing in the game now. Like, it's so objective focused, and they just don't have any sort of special tricks or much high roll potential. So unless you've really got a way to kind of buff up those snipers and make them more effective, I was thinking about a list with, Boba on that rule with respect turn, hitting a couple of snipers and maybe with a Cassian or something, and that's not terrible. But again, you're giving up so much board space in order to pull that combo off, and it's not that powerful. So yeah, I think Commandos are in a pretty weird spot. I'm giving them C tier because I think it's maybe unfair to chuck these down in D tier, because I don't think they're like a colossal detriment to your army. I just think they just have in a bit of a weird spot and don't have a very clear identity. Wookiees, these are the freedom fighter version, and this is the melee one. And yeah, it's a bit sad. I think Wookiees are showing their age now, and they don't have to. I think there are some fairly straightforward changes you could make to make these guys feel significantly better. They're just a very expensive melee threat that doesn't actually deal that much damage. They even upgraded, if you've got the battle shield, you've got 6 black from the base unit, 2 red. That's probably about 4.5, maybe 5 hits with no keywords. Yeah, it's just not very good. And sleeper cell do melee better, like for instance, than this, which is a pretty much purely dedicated melee threat. And this unit's significantly more expensive. It's normally going to end up over 90 points, probably up towards 100 when you take some of the upgrades that I think you probably need. You're probably taking tenacity on these guys, for instance. So yeah, I mean, they're fairly tough, but the 3 HP with no surges on the white dice means that effectively, if you think of the unit as having 12 HP base, with those white saves on top, you're only adding, a 6th. So maybe this gets up to like 14 or 15 effective wounds, which just isn't very good. Like sleeper cell get up to, I think it's like 11, and that's before dodges, and they're significantly cheaper and have better firepower. Like, yeah, this is not. It just doesn't feel very good. And I really hope, given they're in the core boxes, Wookiees maybe get a bit of love. But even something like a tactical one maybe would help, or some way to just make that melee threat feel scarier would be quite good. Because in a world where you've got the powerhouses of Arcs and Sleeper Cell running around in the Special Forces slot, I think these guys do really struggle. So yeah, I think they are a D tier. I think if you put these in your list, almost objectively, they're probably going to make your list worse. I know there are some people who are good with Wookiees, and in the Battle Force in Gar, I can maybe see it a bit more, but I think with these guys as they are, it's not great. Yeah, and actually, I think I did the maths, and I think scatter fleets do almost exactly the same damage as these guys, and they can get the Pierce one on the scattergun as well, and they cost 62. So yeah. Moving over to the shooting Wookiees, the Kashyyk Resistance. I can see these guys a bit more, and I think as a mid-range unit that can maybe just take a bit of attrition and still be okay, there's maybe something there. I think, again, they're definitely on the weaker side, as you can see from this power level of a C. But there's maybe something in there. And I think especially with the bowcaster, although they're only firing 2 white each, which is, what, like 3/4 of a hit. So this unit probably averages, what is it, like 3 Pierce 1 maybe? Not even that. No, it probably is about 3 Pierce 1. Yeah, great. Like, at least it's range 3, and being range 3 does definitely have value. But again, just give him something. Give him a tactical 1. Give him an enrage. Give it just something that gives you a reason to run Wookiees. Because currently it's just sort of 12 HP that is going to kind of run around the board gradually. Well, not even gradually. Get whittled down very quickly, and then, you know, as soon as you lose that bowcaster, it's kind of over. There's no real damage output anymore. So maybe into some armies, like if you're hitting a lot of Empire and a lot of clones, that value of that Pierce does go up a bit. But yeah, I think I'm coping a bit here because I think they're still pretty bad. I've even put at the bottom tactical 1 or something. Just something that gives that dice pool a bit more oomph would just help so much. But yeah, Wookiee's just in a rough place right now, and I think while they're not on the sort of low power level of, I think I'd still argue the Ewok Skirmishers are Rebels' worst unit in the melee Ewok unit, but I think the Wookiee Freedom Fighters are not that far behind in terms of just what you're getting for your points. But, you know, they are cool thematically, and I can definitely see the attraction in getting a load of Wookiees out on the board and just charging in. Like, I can definitely see why that is fun, but in terms of a more competitive standpoint, I think they are in a really rough place. To the complete other end of the competitive spectrum, Sleeper Cell are S tier, and are they the best unit in Rebels? It's a really good question. You know, their competition are Bad Batch, their competition is Din, their competition is probably ATRTs, but in a world where we no longer have Pathfinders and Special Forces slot, I think how obscenely far ahead Sleeper Cell now in terms of power level are in that Special Forces slot is pretty ridiculous. I mean, you're nearly always taking the Astro. I said before in my Sleeper Cell unit guide, like, if you can't find the points for that Astro, just cut something in the army. Just drop a heavy weapon, give these guys, you know, transponder, targeting scopes, prepared supplies. Just give them something to get that Astro on, because getting dodges on these guys, especially on those early turns, so valuable. And every guy in Sleeper Cell you can keep alive adds, I think, 1.5 hits or something. Like, it's so much damage. 12 surging black is just ridiculous. And I think one of the things I've noticed with Sleeper Cell is that it reaches the point with them where you are rolling so many dice that it's actually almost impossible to roll badly. Like, on those smaller dice pools, the variance is just that bit higher. But when you are throwing 12 surging black with normally an aim, possibly 2, and targeting scopes if you're feeling a bit luxurious, it's just ridiculous. And, you know, you're so gutted if you somehow roll, you know, less than 11 hits, which is ridiculous. That is so much damage. And even if you're shooting into cover, this was one of the things I thought would slow Sleeper Cell down a bit, was shooting into heavy cover. But the thing is, when you're rolling that many dice, you're normally pulling 2 or 3 crits anyway. And then, you know, you're rolling maybe 8, maybe 9 for heavy cover. On average, they get rid of 3. So then you're left still with like 9 going through. And that's still really good and can one hit a lot of units. And, you know, against armor, it's one of those things where actually you don't necessarily need the det packs. You can just be like, yeah, I'm rolling 12 surging black and you've only got armor 5, so I'm going to put 6 over the top and make you make 6 saves. And it's just so much damage. And I think my preferred setup for Sleep Cell at the moment is a bit more defensive. So I think in a world, obviously, where we don't have Pathfinders anymore, I think personally Triple Sleeper Cell is the way to go. I normally find myself putting 1 in a bus with targeting scopes just for that early aggression. And, you know, if you can get an orthodox tactician on your bus as well, Sleeper Cell are normally popping out with an aim already. And then after that move, they're getting 2 aims. And with the targeting scopes, you're normally going to be hitting 12 straight away out the gate. And, you know, with the transport from the bus, they can probably get up to about, I think it's range 4.5 effectively across the board. Like, the threat range is absurd, and they can just, you know, Sleeper Cell have, one hit killed Wicket with a load of dodges for me before and things like that. Like they just don't care. And then my other two Sleeper Cells would be a bit more defensive, as I've been saying. It's probably with the Astro and with prepared supplies, just to keep them going. And because it's a bit tricky in Rebels sometimes, even though Sleeper Cell are super high priority, like you really want to activate them early, sometimes you just can't get them out of the bag in time if you haven't given them an order. So having that prepared supplies ready to go just to set up that nimble might save a couple of guys over the course of a turn. And then, even at 4 or 5 left, Sleeper Cells still pack a real punch and can still be really scary. So they will hang around. And with that Astro, they got 7 models, so they're quite hard to fully finish off. Yeah. I think they have to get nerfed, and I am a little bit worried about Rebels competitively post Sleeper Cell nerf, because actually so much of your damage does now come from Sleeper Cell, having played a few games without Pathfinders. I'm gonna say I think Pathfinders were nearly as good, if not slightly better than Sleeper Cell by the end. I think people hate Sleeper Cells so much, and obviously I know that's the thing, the reason they get chipped down. But I think people just hated Sleeper Cells so much and played against them so much they did learn how to kind of deal with them. But I think Pathfinders, there's not a lot you can do to play around them, and in terms of like actual chip damage and attacks that you get from Pathfinders, I think they often have better output than Sleeper Cell. But yeah, that's a video for another time, and RIP Pathfinders. But yeah, in a world where we're getting 3 Sleeper Cell in Special Forces, I think they could still carry Rebels really well on their shoulders. And yeah, my goodness, the damage output is crazy. I think it's a bit of a feels bad now, because it's reached the point as a Rebel player that when you face off against someone and you get, in my case, 2 ATRTs, but as soon as you're getting more than 1 ATRT, you're kind of feeling a bit try-hardy. But when you get your 2 ATRTs out and your 3 Sleeper Cell, you just look at the other person and they just look a bit, and they're like, oh, here we go again. And I do get it, and I just wish Rebels had a bit more diversity in terms of their options, and I hope we get an alternative to Pathfinders quite soon, because I don't just want to be that guy rocking up with Bus, Triple Sleeper Cell, 2 ATRTs, let's say Din and Luke or something. Like, it's not a feels good. So yeah, here's hoping we get some more diverse options soon. Obviously, I'm talking from the purely power gaming try hard side of things. There are still lots of nice thematic options in the Rebel Special Forces slot, but we saw a pretty common trend of the Rebel lists at Worlds, and I see no reason why that trend won't continue into the future. But yeah, thank you very much for listening, and I hope this made a bit of sense. Here is the tier list now. I think I'm going to try and keep squeezing them all onto one tier list for now, but B tier is now becoming, as you probably would expect, so obscenely bloated that we may have to split off into separate tier lists. But yeah, as I said, thank you for watching. And if you disagree with any of this, absolutely fire it in the comments below. If I'm way off on Wookiees, tell me. If I'm way off on the Commandos and you've actually found them really powerful, tell me. Obviously, I appreciate there's different metas and things like that all around the world, but yeah, let me know in the comments below, and see you for the next one.